Good morning. I call the Legacy Finance Committee to order, and seeing a quorum present, we will begin the meeting. Anyway, thank you for joining us this morning for our first Legacy meeting. It is going to be the golden age of the Legacy Committee for this session. We will do great things for the state of Minnesota, constitutionally, thanks be to God, and we will do great things for our environment, our clean water, our Lessard-Sams folks, parks and rivers and trails, and preservation, arts and culture, and we have some really great things happening in the state from this legacy amendment. I have been the last 2 months been meeting with the folks from all these organizations and have observed and witnessed some of the great things that the state's doing with this tax to the taxpayers. And I think they can be proud to know that our organizations are very, very responsible and doing wonderful things for our state in all 87 counties and pretty much all cities throughout our state. So it's an honor to be here and to chair the Legacy Committee. And with that, I would like to start by having all of our members introduce each other and themselves. Tell us a little bit about yourself and the district you represent. And we'll start off to the left, Representative Burkle. My right, yes. Their left, stage left.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name's John Burkle. I represent District 1A up in northwest corner of Minnesota, Roseau, Kitson, Marshall, and Pennington counties. I've spent the last 2 years on Lessard-Sams Council and looking forward to the work we're doing on Legacy Committee.
Good morning. My name's Tom DePel. I'm from Cottage Grove. I also serve Hastings, Nininger, and Denmark townships. I grew up on the Mississippi River and I've been boating, pontooning, duck hunting, deer hunting, and all the other sorts, fishing on the river. Love the natural resources of Minnesota. Likewise, grew up camping up north and have enjoyed our state parks. I'm a business owner. I've got 20 employees just south of here, 15 minutes, and live back down on the river again on the end of Gray Cloud Island, where we enjoy all those things as well. And I'm looking forward to serving on this committee to serve our constituents and our state well.
Representative Josh Heisman. I have the Brainerd Lakes area, so I'm glad to hear that Representative DePel is coming to the Great North. A lot of folks coming into my community to recreate. Glad to be on the committee again. Thank you.
I'm Bjorn Olson. This will be my first term on the Legacy Committee. I am from 22A, which is the Fairmont Blue Earth, south of Mankato district. Excited to be here in something that I've historically supported, but have never had a hand in crafting.
Thank you very much, representatives. Good to have you here. We have a really good team set up for this, teed up for this session. And now for one of the most important folks in our room, and our staff. So we'll start with our staff to my left.
Hi, my name is Karina Nelson. I am the CLA for Legacy Finance, and I'm also working with Representative McDonald as his LA, and I'm really excited to see all of the amazing things that are going to happen in this committee.
Chair and members, Mary Davis from the House Research Department. I staff the Arts and Cultural Heritage portion, and I'm happy to help.
Janelle Taylor, also with House Research. I staff the Environment and Natural Resources Committee as well as this committee, and then cover the 3 natural resource related funds in this committee.
And I'm Brad Hegemer at the House Fiscal Analysis Department, and I cover the legacy funds as well as the Environment and Natural Resources Committee and the funds there.
Hi, I'm Amy Zipko. I'm the committee administrator.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Zipko. We had one late fella come in, our vice chair, but we won't rub it in at all. I'm sure it was cold outside and you had to take the tunnel. Would you please introduce yourself?
Thank you. My name's Roger Scrava. I represent District 3A from Ely, Minnesota. I sat on Legacy for 2 years and I look forward to continuing. Have a great day.
Thank you, Representative. We look forward to your sage advice as well for the committee. And as I think most people in the room know, that we legislators cannot do this job well at all without our staff and our nonpartisan staff. So for that, we are grateful and look forward to a very successful session and committee hearing. So moving right along, we will have an overview now with our arts and culture, and that is arts and culture and heritage. Very important to add that word and that fund, and that's Ms. Davis. And for that, Ms. Davis, I will turn it over to you.
Chair and members, Mary Davis from the House Research Department. I am going to walk through the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. I'm going to give you just a little bit of background about it and kind of reference the statute that governs it. So the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund is one of the 4 legacy funds created by a constitutional amendment approved by the voters in 2008. Of the 3/8 of 1% sales tax, the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund gets 19.75%. So the amendment requires that the funds supplement traditional sources of funding for these purposes and prohibits the funds from being used as a substitute for traditional sources of funding. The Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund is a state fund that can be spent only for arts, arts education, and arts access, and to preserve Minnesota's history and cultural heritage. That's the constitutional language. There's no permanent council or other group that makes recommendations for the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. The legislature has based funding decisions largely on input and recommendations from stakeholders. They've distributed the money to many different public and private groups. Certain state entities and private institutions have received funding in consecutive years, and some organizations have just received one-time funding. A notable difference, if you're new to the Legacy Fund, is that there is no base. This is something that's recreated every biennium. So the chairs and the committees in the House of Representatives and the Senate with jurisdiction over this area have emphasized that arts and cultural heritage is not a guaranteed funding source for past recipients, and they've been flexible to work on new projects over time and to pivot in how they manage the funding. The fund has grown over the years as state sales tax revenues have grown. So 15 years ago, the first appropriation was $44.5 million for that first year. Last biennium, the combined biennium funding was $192 million. So most of the funds are distributed to state agencies, councils, and commissions. They act as the fiscal agent who either use the funds for their own programs or they distribute the funds for education and programming, providing grants to other groups. Those fund arts, culture, heritage projects, and history projects throughout the state. And there was in the past when things were able to be funded by like capital expenditures, they've kind of avoided capital expenditures, but it has been used from time to time for some capital expenditures. One of the big recipients is the State Arts Board. Since 2013, 47% of the annual arts and cultural heritage appropriation have been required to go to the Minnesota State Arts Board. That's in statute. It's the largest recipient by far of Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. And this state agency provides art programming, arts education, and lots of grants to individual artists and organizations. They've traditionally used 30% of the funding they receive to go to the regional arts councils located throughout Minnesota to provide arts programming and education in each region of the state. There are 11 regional arts councils that encompass the entire state of Minnesota, and there is a complex funding formula for the distribution of those funds. The Minnesota Historical Society has received funding each year from the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. The funding has been used for programs at the Minnesota History Center and other historical sites run by the Minnesota Historical Society throughout the state. They also give grants to historical societies throughout the state and other historical grants for different programs and projects. The libraries, the regional library system has been a recipient of funding over the years, and that's appropriated through the Minnesota Department of Education. And they provide grants to the 12 regional library systems encompassing the entire state. They use that for history, culture, and literary arts, bringing in speakers and hosts and different things like that, different events. There's also a reserve requirement, and this does apply to all 4 funds, but in Minnesota Statute 129D.17, it requires that 5% of projected tax receipts not be appropriated. This reserve law was passed in 2017 to keep from accidentally appropriating too much money and having grants go out that couldn't actually be funded when tax receipts are lower than anticipated. There have been sort of traditional grantees who've received grants. Some of those include the Humanities Center, which received grants for their own programming. That's a state humanities center. And they also distribute grants to cultural organizations and to children's museums, which has been very popular. There are often grants given to public television and public radio, and the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council has been a regular recipient over the years. So some of the requirements for arts and cultural heritage money can be found in the statute governing this section, which is 129D.17. For example, projects funded by arts and cultural heritage funds have to be located in Minnesota. They have to supplement traditional sources of funding, not supplant, and they have to have grant agreements consistent with the state grants management's laws, which is in Chapter 16B. There's also a reporting requirement that's been around for pretty much since the beginning, and the statute requires recipients of fund money to report to the Legislative Coordinating Commission by January 15th of the fiscal year they receive funding, and then that's posted on the Legacy website. If you haven't been there, this is a really, really wonderful source of information for all four funds, both background, but then also all of the grant recipients are listed there on the LCC website. And there's a secondary reporting requirement now in 129D that requires all recipients of money to submit information to the committee with jurisdiction over the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. And that is to provide an accounting of funding, including what's been distributed and what has not been spent, summary information on programs and information on the grants provided to individuals, entities, and organizations, and an assessment of whether or not the funds celebrate cultural diversity or reach diverse communities in Minnesota. The 2023 legislature directed recipients of arts and cultural heritage funds to provide access to all community members by utilizing free days or distributing free or reduced tickets and distributing information to make sure households, regardless of income, are able to access arts and cultural heritage programming. That was a directive just included in the funding legislation. So you can get more information from the LCC website. You can also look at, if you were looking for grants, for an individual or an organization, you can look on the state grants website as well as the various fiscal agents. That's all.
Ms. Davis, thank you very much. Ms. Davis, thank you very much. Any questions for Ms. Davis? I think it's before we move on to Ms. Taylor, it's worthy to note, and why this works so well is that it's a zero base. Unlike other agencies in our government, I've been here 15 years, and certainly the zero-based budgeting is something that I've been a proponent of, and I think it's very important. I think it's good fiscal responsibility to start at zero, and I think that's why this legacy amendment works and why it's popular with the people. We start at zero and work our way up based upon sales that the state collects. That's very responsible spending of taxpayer dollars, and that's what will keep this working as long as we follow that great constitutional amendment. With that, Ms. Taylor, can you please walk us through the Parks and Trails and the Clean Water Fund?
Sure, Mr. Chair and members, I'm going to walk through the Legacy Amendment Natural Resources Fund document that's in your packet. It is a few years out of date, but most of the information other than the average dollar amounts should be accurate. I'm going to skip the Outdoor Heritage Fund since the Lessard-Sams Outdoor Heritage Council staff is here and they can do a much more thorough job than I can do. So moving to the Clean Water Fund, this is a fund that receives 33% of the revenues from the Legacy Amendment. By the Constitution, it must be used to protect, enhance, and restore water quality in lakes, rivers, and streams, and to protect groundwater from degradation. The Constitution also requires that at least 5% of the funds are used to protect drinking water sources. There is a council that is required to make recommendations on how to use the money in the fund. It's a 28-member council. 17 of those members are voting members. These are citizens appointed by the governor. And then there's also 11 non-voting members, one representative from 7 different state entities, and then 4 legislators. The Clean Water Council has a different process than what you'll see from the Lessard-Sams Outdoor Heritage Council. They largely make recommendations for programs at the various state agencies that are part of the council. The council is required to submit a report by January 15th each odd number of year, and they have done that. And then the governor and then the legislature will use those recommendations to craft their budget. The governor's budget recommendations have incorporated the Clean Water Council recommendations, so you'll see those within budget overviews and committees with those agencies sometimes. Those total about $311 million for the biennium, this upcoming biennium. The majority of the money goes to on-the-ground projects through the grant programs at the Board of Water and Soil Resources. Other big chunks of money will go to the PCA and DNR for their monitoring and assessment work. If there's no questions there, I can move on to the Parks and Trails Fund. This particular fund receives 14.25% of the revenue from the legacy funds. And it must be used to support parks and trails of regional or statewide significance. Unlike the other two natural resources funds, there isn't a permanent council that makes recommendations for how to use these funds. However, because there was some vigorous debate early in the process, the legislature tasks those who are receiving money to kind of come up with a compromise, and that came to be known as the 40-40-20 split. 40% of the money would go to the DNR for the state parks and trails, and then 40% would go to the Met Council for the existing metropolitan regional parks and trails system, and then 20% would go to regional parks and trails outside the metropolitan area. And then later on, a council called the Greater Minnesota Parks and Trails Commission was established to make recommendations for how to use those funds. And they have established guidelines for how to determine what is a regional park and trail. I think that's about it, all I have for the Parks and Trails Fund.
Chair McDonald, do you mind if I ask a question to Ms. Taylor?
Please do, yes.
Thank you.
Please do, you have the floor.
And thank you, Ms. Taylor, for your help so far on the PFAS funding for Hastings. I appreciate your help there. Beyond that, under the Clean Water Fund context, with the $120 million for water, and that being 33% of the revenue, it states that at least 5% of that fund should be provided for protecting drinking water. And then likewise, I believe other aspects of that could be tied to the PFAS contamination that we see in Hastings. And so I was wondering what your thoughts were on Hastings being included in some of that funding.
Ms. Taylor.
Mr. Chair, Representative Dibble. According to the Constitution, this money just needs to be used to protect, enhance, restore water quality in lakes, rivers, and streams, and to protect groundwater from degradation, and then spent at least 5% to protect drinking water sources. So to the extent that the Hastings project protects drinking water sources or otherwise meets that criteria, I believe the legislature could appropriate money for that purpose. I mean, as I mentioned, the Clean Water Council does make recommendations. Historically, those have been followed for the most part, but Hastings could either go before the council or this body and request funding.
Great, thank you, Chair.
Representative, very good, thank you. Yeah, thank you for the question. It's certainly very important that the drinking water that we drink is very healthy for us, and be sure to hydrate. With that said, we will move along in our agenda, and that is to talk about our legacy reserves. And with that, Mr. Hagemeyer will present that to us. Mr. Hagemeyer?
Mr. Chair, I'll go down this one-page document that just says Minnesota House Fiscal Analysis on top, and then it has the legacy finance in each of the 4 funds listed. As my counterparts mentioned, there is a 5% reserve requirement in statute for each of the funds since 2017, just to keep the balances positive if there's a change in the next forecast, since some of the recommendations through the Clean Water Council and Outdoor Heritage Fund are started more than a year in advance of appropriations being available. So it's good to have a balance there that can accept some change in the tax receipt number. Under the first box here, you'll see the Outdoor Heritage Fund, and the first columns are FY '26 and '27, which is the upcoming biennium that we're looking at appropriations for. The next portion of it is FY '28 and '29. But as you mentioned, there is zero base for these funds, so the FY '28 and '29 is just to be consistent across our tracking documents. But there's no appropriations made in future years or no base set for those years. Under the Outdoor Heritage Fund, you'll see for the biennium, there's $327.229 million available after the 5% reserve. However, the Outdoor Heritage Fund makes annual recommendations. It's one of the 4 funds that does that. The others make biennial recommendations. So the annual number available for the Outdoor Heritage Fund is $168.395 million. And then under the Outdoor Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund, it's $184.789 million that's available to appropriate. The Clean Water Fund is $310,752,000 across the biennium, and you'll see, I believe, the Clean Water Council recommendations and Governor's recommendations are coming in right at that number. And then the Parks and Trails Fund, there's $133.135 million available to appropriate. Just to note, any appropriations made by the committee would be based on the February forecast. So it's either late February, beginning of March. So these numbers will change, hopefully not significantly, but they could go up or down a little bit based on the February forecast. And I think that's all I have, unless there's some questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hagemeyer. We'll have to get used to that. In other committee rooms in the SOB, they were always on. Mr. Hagemeyer, thank you kindly for that. Any questions for Mr. Hagemeyer regarding the reserves? Good to see our reserves are somewhat healthy. That means people are spending money, right? Okay, with that, we have the oversight. Overview and oversight. That's what this committee's for. Overview of the Outdoor Heritage Fund, Lessard-Sams Outdoor Heritage Council. And with that, we have Mark Johnson and Joe Pavelko. Gentlemen, welcome to the committee. For the record, please introduce yourself.
Mr. Chair, members, my name is Mark Johnson. I'm the Executive Director for the Lessard-Sams Outdoor Heritage Council.
And Mr. Chair and members, I'm Joe Pavelko, the Assistant Director with the Lessard-Sams Council.
Very good. Thank you, gentlemen. You may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. I'll just give a quick overview and I'll turn it over to Mr. Pavelko, but I've had the honor of serving as the director for a little over 10 years now, and it really has been an honor. The staff of the Lessard-Sams Outdoor Heritage Council serves the council and helps the council work. And I must mention that besides, that council is made up of people that are appointed by statutory direction. And Joe will go through all of that. But I should mention, too, that we have 2 here. Of course, Representative Burkle sits on the council at the current time. And in the past, Representative or Chair Heinzman has served on the council with us, too, for several years. So a lot of historical knowledge in those 2, even at this point. And also, on the other side of the aisle, Chair Lilly has served on the council for a number of years. So you have a good stack of knowledge if you have questions that you don't want to provide to us, but you want to get an extra inside look. I should mention that Mr. Pavelko is our Assistant Director for the Lessard Council. Also, we have 2 other staff. Our Program Analyst Manager is Sandy Smith. She's participating online or at least viewing online today. And our other our other staff member is Tom Rebman, who is our council assistant. So that's it. That's the staff for the council. 4 people. It's a lean and I think very effective staff. We try to stay that way, and we try to stay helpful to not just the council, but legislators and the public, as well as the partners who want to find out how can we apply for these funds. I've been out of commission for about the last week, so thankfully Mr. Pavelko was kind enough to put together the proposal or the presentation, and he'll be providing that to you now. So I'll hand it over to him, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Pavelko, you can proceed with your presentation.
Mr. Chair and members, again, Joe Pavelko, the Assistant Director with the Lessard-Sams staff. Before getting started, I want to thank Mark. He's providing a big service to us. So I like to go elk hunting out west, and we go in grizzly bear country. And part of being safe with grizzly bears is not whether or not you can spray your bear spray. It's just whether or not you're going to be the fastest in the group. And so right now, Mark is providing a service for us. So if a grizzly bear came in, you think he'd take one for the team. So what we're going to go over is just an overview of the council, how things work, and then just some examples of projects. So as you can see, it was ratified by the voters in 2008. It's a 25-year lifespan. We're on, I believe it's year 17, which is amazing to think about. And we get a third of the 3/8 of 1%, which equates to about $150 million annually. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. It depends on how the partners do in spending their money. And something that's very important is it requires the outdoor heritage funds to be used to protect, restore, enhance wetlands, prairies, forests, and habitat for fish, game, and wildlife. And that, we ask that question every time we speak with folks who are looking to apply for funds. The first question we ask, does it protect, restore, enhance wetlands, prairies, forests, or habitat for fish, game, and wildlife? And that's the thing that kind of directs everything we do. Our statutory guidance is in 97A.056, and that has all of the requirements for the Lessard Council. So if the project requirements, everything that you can think of, that's what governs the work that we do. We are part of the legislative branch, and we do only make recommendations to the legislature. So the Lessard Council makes recommendations to you, and you are the ones who ultimately make the decision of whether or not to fund. Interesting point about the statute is also requires a small grants program. So not only are you making appropriations, like large appropriations to the DNR or Bowser in the millions, the tune of millions, but it also requires a small grants program, and that small grants program is put on by the Department of Natural Resources, and those are for smaller projects, anywhere from $5,000 to $500,000, and they have a breakout of where those funds go. They have a very simplified process, so if your project is $20,000, they have a very simplified process that you can get the money quicker and spend that. And so those are usually like small, could be sportsmen's groups, it could be lake associations, all those kinds of smaller groups that don't really have the fiscal capacity and the staff to do millions of dollars in a year. That's what that was created for. And so there's been over 1,000 projects so far for CPL, which is phenomenal. Here's the breakout of the Lessard members. 4 appointed by the governor, 4 appointed by the Senate, and 4 appointed by the House. You can see there's a good distribution, a wide swath across the state, so a lot of the local issues are being covered just based on where those folks live. We have an annual process, as Mr. Hagermeyer pointed out, or maybe it was Ms. Taylor. We make recommendations annually, and again, that's to the tune of about $150 million a year. It's a year-long process, so we put out a call in early April, and that closes in May, so people have 2 months to basically go into our online system, understand all the requirements, put a proposal together. In June and July, our council reviews those proposals. They debate and deliberate on what projects they like, what they don't like. The proposers come in and make a presentation to the council. And then in October and November, the council decides what projects they like and make recommendations. During that process, the project managers, they put together what's called an accomplishment plan, which I'll talk about later. That spells out how they're going to do the work, where they're going to do it, their budget, how many people they're going to hire to do it. All those details spell out, exactly how they're going to do the work and where they're going to do the work. If they're lucky enough to get funding, that money doesn't start until the following July. So a process like now that will start this coming May and June, they won't receive that funding until next year. So that'd be 2026 of July if the legislature makes those recommendations. When the council reviews the proposals, there's a whole list of things that they look at. The proposals get scored. Some of the things they look at is accountability. We look at past performance. If you received money, how did you do? Did you deliver what you said you were going to do? Is it conservation focused? So we want to make sure that the projects they're doing meet the requirements of the state, pheasant plan or the state duck plan, or, that the proposals are doing something, meeting a greater good, and it's not just some random project that somebody wants to do. It needs to make sense scientifically, again, science-based. If they're going to do a proposal that talks about endangered species, we want to make sure that they're actually, working on habitat and making sure science, that best science is for endangered species, and again, coordinates with approved conservation plans. And then it's also a competitive process. So you get scored based on, the amount of money that you want to spend, the amount of outputs that you want to provide, those costs. The lower the cost, generally the council likes that better per acre. The amount of match you bring in, the council members like that. So the more federal funds or private funds you bring in, that usually scores higher. So it is a competitive process, and that's should result in better projects in the end. So the first 16 years, the legislature has allocated $1.88 billion from the Outdoor Heritage Fund to restore, protect, and enhance habitat through Minnesota. And that, again, that's only to protect, restore, and enhance fish, game, and wildlife. That's not for any other cause. So that's a lot of money going just for that thing. We talked about match before, but $647 million has already been leveraged to that $1.88 billion. A lot of that does come from federal funds. So like the North American Wetland Conservation Act, so NACA. So if a duck hunter would buy a duck stamp, some of that money goes to acquire more habitat, and people will use that money to bring into this for their proposal to make their dollars go further. Over $100 million has gone to the CPL program. And again, that's the small grants program that goes to DNR, and over 1,000 grants have been allocated. And I will also mention too that because the money does go to DNR, because that money has, I guess, been spent, it goes to the DNR. So those are actually called grants, whereas the money that would go to the DNR through the allocation process, we call those allocations. So it's not a true granting process, I would consider it. We've spent all that money, and what that has resulted in is 1.3 million acres of habitat has been restored, protected, or enhanced. And again, CPL, they've put out a lot of the small grants, and 230 of those grants are in the 7 Metro County area within the city limits of Duluth, Rochester, and St. Cloud. So that includes Hennepin County, Carver County, the local metro counties. Who gets all these grants or appropriations? So there's 2 main state agencies, DNR and Bowser, local units of government, that's tribal units, counties, cities, SWCDs, watershed districts, and then all the nonprofit organizations, the larger ones that typically come to mind, like the Nature Conservancy or Ducks Unlimited, Great River Greening, those folks. And then obviously the ones that go through the DNR, there's a lot of smaller folks that get that as well. So how do we go from appropriation to habitat? And that's mainly what we as staff deal with. So every appropriation, there's an accomplishment plan, and this is their guiding document that has their budget, where they're going to do the work, how they're going to do the work, and that's reviewed and approved by the council. And so for this year's annual process, for this year's bill, the council has reviewed those proposals. The proposals turned into accomplishment plans based on the amount of money that the council wanted to allocate to them. And then that guiding document will follow that project all the way through, and will start July 1st. And that's the document that anytime there's a question, or if the program manager wanted to change something, that would have to be reviewed and approved in that accomplishment plan. And that's what Lessard staff review and look over. In addition, so the appropriations that go to folks like Pheasants Forever, there's also a contract with the DNR. And you'll see in the language, it'll say, the first year to the Commissioner of Natural Resources for an agreement with. And so the money doesn't go directly to Pheasants Forever NGOs. I don't think there's ever been a time where money or funding has gone directly to an NGO. It goes through the DNR. There are there are contract people, and then they manage the process with the recipient. So the Lessard Council reviews and approves the accomplishment plan, and that's like the day-to-day thing. And then anything, when money is being spent, which is reimbursement based, the DNR approves those day-to-day expenditures. So they're the fiscal capacity, we're the general oversight of the council. And as you can see, there was a lot of money being spent so far. We have 265 open appropriations right now, and that's from 2015 to present, and that's $960 million that's kind of open and available to be spent or being spent right now. And the only way we can do that is we have an online program management system. Like Mark said, that we are a staff of 4 and we want to be, provide Tiffany quality services at Walmart prices. But, we can only do that because of our online system. The program managers are required to give us 2 status updates every year. And so we review those and make sure everybody's on track doing what they're supposed to be doing. And if there's issues, we try and catch that, quicker than later and try and figure out a way forward. And it also manages all of our data and our reporting requirements. So everything that we do is on this online program management system. And you can see there's a little picture there. That's what on the right, that's what the accomplishment plans look like. So if you were to go onto our website, there'd be a whole list, all hyperlinked to all of the accomplishment plans.
Mr. Pavelko, we have a question from Representative Heinzman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Assistant Director, I just had a couple of questions. And I want to first thank you for mentioning the dollars. I think you said $265 million in open, ready to spend dollars or appropriations. Over the last few years, especially during COVID times, there was some questions that came up relative to extensions. And we had quite a long discussion about that. It's been a little bit of time since I have previously served on the Lessard-Sams. So is there any update on that? Where are those extensions at, if you don't mind? We can cover that later if it's in your presentation, but I didn't want to pass an opportunity if it wasn't.
Mr. Pavelko?
Mr. Chair and members, so the appropriations have a timeline for acquisition and acquisition of properties, either fee or easements, conservation easements. You get 4 years to acquire and 4 years to restore those properties that you acquire. For restoration, you get 5 years if you're only doing restoration work. Sometimes program managers need longer. Sometimes it's because of weather, something floods, they can't get in the field. A lot of it's just weather dependent. Sometimes they're trying to get approvals, either, trying to get permits or waiting for federal funds to do certain projects. And sometimes it just doesn't work. So during COVID, when everything locked down, people just couldn't get out and do the work because they weren't allowed to. So during COVID, there were a lot of extensions where the folks came in, asked the council, do you agree, should we get extensions? And then those extensions were recommendations to you, and then those were passed. So there were a lot of extensions because of COVID. Those have, in recent years, the last 2 years, those have gone down quite a bit. There was quite a long discussion among the council members of whether or not they felt it made sense to give extensions, and they decided that they would only give extensions on extreme circumstances or if it made sense. So I think this year in the bill we have 3 extensions, and those are mostly weather related and then permit related as well. So I guess long story short, there used to be a lot more and it's tending to go down.
Representative Heinzman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for that answer. I know there was a number of cases where we were waiting on, if I recall, the Corps of Engineers or others to move, and it was one extension after another, and costs were changing, and it can be really challenging. So hopefully those things are resolved. It sounds like with only 3 current extensions, we're in pretty good shape at the moment, so I'm glad to get that update. I'll also, just because we were covering this slide, and they're not numbered, but this OHF appropriations slide, I wanted to quickly go back to. There's always an ongoing discussion as to, you know, how much of the dollars are going towards restore, how much enhance, how much protect. Protect is a lot of, well, most frequently fee title. You don't have to have any of this today, but just going forward, it would be nice to know what the breakdown looks like in the coming bill, how much is going towards restore and enhance, which typically is a big discussion because we have a lot of public land in Minnesota. And the most frequent comment I hear from people that are looking to take advantage of those opportunities in the forest and so on is that there's missed opportunity to maintain those properties because we do have vast areas that are available in the park system and such. It'd be nice to have an idea in this next bill, how much is fee title, and then how much goes towards those other 2 priorities. Again, not today, but just out of curiosity at some point. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Very good. Thank you, Representative Heinzman. Mr. Pavelko, if you, I think per Representative Heinzman's request, another time.
Yep, Mr. Chair and members will make sure to provide that for the next bill, but I'll say just on an acre-wise basis, majority of the acres are restore and enhance, and then a smaller amount of acres are the acquisition, so fee title, and then conservation easements. So, but it's not necessarily easier to do restoration enhancement because it's more of a construction type project. You know, it's on the ground type work, so there's a lot of manpower that's needed to spend those dollars versus going out and spending a lot of money to acquire a parcel. So you'll see there's a lot of acres, but the total amount of money going to acquisition is probably higher or as much, even though there's way more acres for restoration and enhancement. So,
thank you, Mr. Pavelko. And actually, with Representative Heinzman, I think we'd all like to see that. I met with the Minnesota Representative Skraba, and I met with the land trust folks yesterday in acquisitions and easements and such. So it would be good for all, I think, the whole committee to recognize and be divvy to that information. With that, we do have a pause, and Representative Skraba has a question. Representative Skraba.
Thank you, Chair. Assistant Director, from appropriation to habitat, contract with DNR, the word program manager keeps coming up. Is that a DNR employee? And if it's not, if it's a nonprofit person, what I'm curious about is how many jobs or how many of these program managers and the dollars go to pay these employees, and how long are they there? And is this these dollars that people think are going, quote, to the environment, are they really just paying for people to have work to, quote, help the environment? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Pavelko.
Mr. Chair and members, so part of the budget in the accomplishment plan talks about the FTEs, and the FTEs, the full-time equivalent, and they're, let's see, the OHF money is a little different, so there's some rider language that says that all the expenditures have to be direct and necessary for the, for the project plan. And so I'll talk about the project managers. Project managers is a Lessard term that we call the people who are in charge that manage the appropriation. So like if Pheasants Forever were to receive money, Pheasants Forever would be the program manager. Then within that accomplishment plan or that program, they may hire a restoration ecologist or somebody to oversee the restoration project. So I'll take Pheasants Forever. So they have one project where they're doing only restoration on public land. So they have people in their budget who are Pheasants Forever employees, and all they do are go out, meet with DNR employees, and Fish and Wildlife employees put together projects on public lands, and then they hire contractors to do the work. And so you have the FTEs that are in our accomplishment plans are the actual people who are receiving the money to deliver the work, if that makes sense. So that's, and it has to be direct and necessary. So if they're not doing anything that makes it direct and necessary to do the work, then they don't get paid. They would have to provide hourly, receipts saying that they worked and, timesheets and that kind of stuff. Those timesheets are given to the DNR who manage those contracts, and they're the ones who say yes or no. Yeah, this makes sense. You provided the right documentation to get reimbursed.
Representative Scraba.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Assistant Director. There's a check and balance there. So one thing I'm curious about when it says contract with the DNR, so when the DNR gets the funds and then they give it to someone else, does the DNR get a cut for handing the money from Outdoor Heritage Fund to a nonprofit? Do they get a cut?
Mr. Pavelko.
Mr. Chair and members, no, they don't. So they have an appropriation in the bottom of our appropriation bill every year. I believe this year it's either $230,000 or $430,000. 430? Yeah, 430, and they're the ones. So they process all those payments. I will also note that this is on a reimbursement basis too. So when Pheasants Forever acquires a parcel, they can either get reimbursed for that or they can go through a whole process, and they work with DNR to make sure they meet those requirements before the money goes out. And so a lot of that is just the paperwork and the accounting and making sure that those payments are going through and meeting state requirements. So, but there's no cut. Like if you provided $100 million, DNR doesn't get a 20% cut. They get a certain amount of money to administer those contracts.
Representative?
$130,000.
That's the cut I'm talking about. Like the administrative, is it 1%, 2%, 9%? Is there, because if there's 300 million and they get 400,000, that's like 11%.
Yeah.
It's just something like that.
Mr. Pavelko.
Mr. Chair and members, so if this year's bill is around 165 million, they're receiving $430,000 to provide that service.
Representative.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Assistant Director.
Mr. Pavelko, you want to continue with your presentation?
Yep, and I'll go through this quickly. So just a few more requirements from 97A.056. So when you do restoration enhancement, it has to be on permanently protected land only. So that can't be on CRP projects, anything that's short-term. It has to be on something that's permanently protected. So that means it's either got to be owned by the state, owned by a county. It could be a Three Rivers Park District property. Anything that is either owned by a government entity or in conservation easement. That's a permanent conservation easement. Those restoration projects have to have a restoration and management plan on file, so they have to go through and actually do a plan. They can't just willy-nilly go out, figure out what to do, spend a bunch of money, and call it good. They have to have plans in place that others can look at. They have to use the best science and techniques. And then also part of our appropriation every year that's required by 97A.056 is there's a requirement for evaluations of those projects. So I believe it's 1% of, or 1/10 of 1% of those available funds has to go for restoration enhancement reviews. And so that money is given to the DNR, and then they go out, randomly select projects and assess whether or not they met what they said they were going to do. And then there's a report every year that's given to the council. With acquisition, the requirements are they can only be permanent, so not 45-year agreements, not 99-year agreements, but permanent agreements. As part of those requirements, there's a notice of funding restriction recorded on the deed, and that prevents any change in the property. Part of that NOFR says that it can't be sold or changed without LSOHC approval and review. And then some of the folks with, I think I'm trying to think, well, we send, anytime there's a change, it also has to be approved by the legislature. So some of you may receive some emails talking about there might be, a land swap, or there might be a new road being put in that means to take a quarter acre off of a property. That needs to be reviewed and approved, not only by the council, but by the by everyone here in charge. So that is also required. That's another thing that we can talk in depth about. And then also that the people who acquire land, and once it goes into their ownership, they're required to report annually about whether or not that property is being used and intended as it was. So every year in November, we get this huge list of all the properties, and everybody has to attest, the DNR, Bowser, Nature Conservancy, they have to attest to us that, yes, we bought this for this purpose, and this land is still being used for that purpose. Here's a map of completed Outdoor Heritage Fund projects. You can see it's a good smattering all across the state, but you'll see there's also some clusters there, and that's because a lot of the existing habitat is left in these certain areas, and so there's a focus on those areas. And also there's just a focused effort once projects get bigger and they start, expanding, the amount of types of projects you can do get bigger and bigger and bigger. And so we talk about science-based doing the best for habitat, and obviously for wildlife, the bigger the property, the better it is for most wildlife. And so that's why you see there's a cluster, because they're focusing in on those existing habitats and making those ones better. Here's just a map of OHF grants in the metro. You can see there's also a good smattering across all of the metro area. And then we'll just talk quickly about some of the types of projects that happen. And these are thousands of projects, which is amazing to think about. There's a lot of money being spent, but this is what results from spending that money. So there's wetland restorations. You can see here, here's a wetland that's has been drained and is choked out with cattails, not really providing anything for waterfowl. Obviously, it might be good for pheasants, but people can make that better. And so there is a drain tile in it. The drain tile gets broken, and then you can see water starts to come back, and then you get water. So that's happening all across the state. Again, it has to be on permanently protected lands or on lands that are acquired. A lot of the acquisitions that are completed are for wetland restoration. So folks are going out looking for projects where there's drained wetlands already that aren't really, high productive farmland. And then obviously if the drained wetland is there, they have the opportunity to restore it. Here's just a photo of a DU guy and his son in front of a wetland. That's what it looked like. So here's the before, here's an after with the wetland vegetation coming in. That's what we want to see. There's my son. We were hunting doves on a wetland restoration. That's the first bird he ever shot. That was on an OHF project in Sibley County. But the partners do small projects, so anywhere from 1/10 of an acre all the way up to thousands of acres. And here's a large marsh lake restoration project that's out west on the Minnesota River. A lot of money, a lot of engineering, a lot of concrete. As you can see, a lot of work goes into something like that. Swan Lake, that's the largest prairie pothole in the U.S. That's in Sibley County or Nicollet County. Again, everything from small to really, really large projects. Here's an example of fee title acquisition. This is in Carver County by Norwood Young America, just west of it. The dark spot here on the map is Tiger Lake, and that's a designated wildlife lake, so it's managed for waterfowl and wildlife. And as you can see, in the year 2013, there was an acquisition on the southwest side of the lake, and that has slowly grown over time. And again, like I talked about building a habitat complex, that's what the folks are trying to do out there. And you can see it's slowly building over time, providing more and more benefits for wildlife. There's some before and after pictures of what it looks like. Invasive hybrid cattail treatment, that's a big thing that's been going on. If you drive out west or drive basically anywhere now in Minnesota, a lot of the wetlands are choked with cattails. So it's just one big dense stand of cattails that really don't provide much benefit for wildlife other than maybe wintering deer and wintering pheasants. And so there's a lot of program managers out there who have projects specifically just to try and, make a dent in the hybrid cattails. That's probably going to be a bigger issue as we move forward. The DNR has a helicopter with a boom on it, and they're spraying large swaths of cattails in shallow lakes, trying to put a dent in it. The picture there on the bottom left, that's from Voyageurs National Park. And so they received money to actually remove the cattails instead of, spraying them with herbicide. They're just actually physically going in and removing them and dumping them onshore and trying to restore the wetlands that way, which seems to work, but it's a lot of money and it takes a lot of time.
We have a question from Representative Heinsman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just going through the slides, I especially appreciate the example you offered with your son. I'm in a similar situation on Duck Lake up in the Crow Wing County area. There's a restoration project there that DU put together that I frequently get requests from my kids during the youth hunt to go in and take advantage of really terrific restoration. And looks like hunting doves should be something I should consider down the road. But I did want to ask about this slide you just mentioned, the invasive hybrid cattail treatment. I don't know if I was around to hear these projects as they came through, and so just for the benefit of the committee and for possibly the public who may be looking at a invasive narrowleaf cattail infestation, how did that work? Did they just have a specific area that they were bringing forward to the Lessard in their proposal, or is there a way for those that, maybe are identifying a problem on their lake or in another situation, who knows what it might be? I'm sure there's a plethora of different scenarios, but is it something that there's dollars available, or is it something where dollars are being deployed and that's the project area and that's it?
Mr. Pavelko or Mr. Johnson, you can answer that question.
Yeah,
Sure.
I'll take that one if I may, Mr. Chair.
Yes,
I always
indeed.
can't keep my mouth shut. So. No, there are dollars available. And in fact, we are always encouraging people to come to us with ideas. And if they want to come to staff and vet an idea first before going to the council, we are really happy to do that. I believe there will be another proposal coming in for cattail treatment this year up north. And I won't divulge any names on that or anything, but every year the roving crews will do some of the cattail removal. They do a lot of the spraying and then going in. But the physical removal and composting of it, as you see in that picture with the big rotary units, that was up on Voyageurs National Park. And they actually came to us with a specific, that was probably just before you came on the council. And they came to us with a specific proposal because they had great big mats of floating hybrid cattails that were choking out the bays up there. They couldn't use any herbicides up there. This was the only method they could really try. So they tried it. They attempted it with dollars from Outdoor Heritage. It worked. In fact, after they'd removed the mats, that first year or the next year, they would see wild rice coming back. So the seed is still there. The native seed is still viable underneath. And that's been, they've had 2 or 3 appropriations that they've continued on with that. So, and there have been some appropriations through the CPL that have gone that direction too. There is money available. It is something the council is interested in listening to proposals about. So, yeah, we'd love to answer any questions on that.
Representative Heinsman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I too am struggling with the transition from the state office building to this setup. So I apologize to the public. We're having a little learning curve as we adjust to turning the mics on. I would just follow up with that question with an additional question. That process of going to the Lessard, that makes sense. I'm glad that there's dollars available. Is there also potentially proposals that would allow folks to maybe more easily access help through maybe, say, a SWCD? Is there any money for SWCDs to work on this potentially, or is it just proposers that have come in with suggestions and then that is the process?
Mr. Johnson?
Mr. Chair and Chair Heinzman, I don't recall offhand any SWCDs who have programs that specifically are about removal of hybrid cattails, but that doesn't mean there can't be. And also, those, SWCDs or nonprofits can apply, or local units of government can apply for those funds through CPL or through the council. So you have the small grants and the large grants, and we are, as staff, we're willing to help navigate that with people.
Representative Heinzman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a comment.
Yes.
Narrow-leaf cattail is a much bigger problem in Minnesota than most of us really want to believe. And the example of floating mats is a good one, because there have been examples where acres of this will break off and create a huge problem as it bounces around a body of water and does damage to infrastructure, and just a real problem for habitat. Just also would add to that, we need to be a little bit more, I think, proactive in our approach to the tools that are available to communities, SWCDs, when it comes to narrow-leaf cattail. And I hope that we're also recognizing that there's not just this huge amount of material that's growing and creating a problem above the water line, but also then, as prolific as narrow-leaf is, creates a lot of material that is then choking off what was once fishable, swimmable waters, as we have a lot of material decomposing, and for lack of a better word, it's just muck that continues to build up in some of these bodies of water. So you'll be seeing down the road, just a heads up to folks, maybe not in this committee, but in other committees, discussion about doing some kind of more easily accessible restoration in those cases. I hope that proposers are thinking about that as they're coming to Lessard-Sams and maybe piloting some things to help restore where we have lost recreational value. That's just my 2 cents. Thank you for the indulgence, Mr. Chair.
Yes, thank you, Representative Heinzman. Do you have a response, Mr. Johnson? I too have a question. Hypothetically, if a person wanted to get rid of the cattails in a marsh or swamp or wetland in their backyard, are you proposing that we can go ahead and do that with in our own backyards that are consuming our great neighborhoods?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I'll plead ignorant on that and ask you, mention that you should probably speak with DNR about that being, if it's navigable waters or public waters, there comes some other rules and regulations in there. But if there's an interest, I can help find out who to talk to if you wish, or if somebody else would wish. Also, if you have other questions or have people interested in finding out more answers or providing questions, we're eager to bounce them. So please, we're eager to help them bounce those questions, because we're interested in the answers too.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. I was afraid you were going to use that 3-letter acronym there, unfortunately. But it is an issue, certainly, and we'll address that not only in our great fields across the state, but also in our communities. Unfortunately, fortunately, in some of our communities in the outer banks, the Wright County particularly, a lot of our good farmland and wetlands are being consumed for home developments, and then they're creating wetlands that are now being absorbed by these hybrid cattails, ruining really what the taxpayers paid for in the first place and why they moved to these such neighborhoods. So this will be an issue. Representative Heinzman, I'm going to appoint him on the top of the committee regarding this, and we'll continue with the hybrid cattails. Quickly, what describes a hybrid cattail as to just a normal cattail?
Mr. Chair and members, I'll do my best, but basically a hybrid cattail is like the Michael Jordan of cattails, where it is the best at doing what it does. And they're very they're very aggressive, they expand, and they can live in environments that the normal native cattails can't. And so that's why you see them proliferate everywhere across the state, and they're moving west.
Thank you, Mr. Pavelko. Yes, so that's a great great analogy, the Michael Jordans of cattails, because they certainly are overtaking these great wetlands and destroying the habitat, in my opinion, and I think in many others. Representative Heinzman, anything else? I think, Assistant Director, you're almost done, so why don't you continue?
Mr. Chair and members, I will say too that a lot of the wetland restoration, the designs, they're designing the wetland restorations now and making them deeper, doing different things so that as soon as they're done doing the work, it just doesn't get choked out with wetlands. So it's being designed in that, like we talked about, with the best science. So, and I'll just quickly talk about a lot of the work is in the prairie grassland part of the state. So you're doing just simple prairie and grassland restoration, sitting on a tractor, planting grassland seed. That's my daughter standing in a restoration that we went and looked at. And again, it's just, taking something that wasn't prairie and turning it into that. Again, that's just a bunch of hard work, time, getting seed, putting it in the ground and watching it grow. Another big part that the council likes to fund is DNR roving crews. These roving crews are just folks who all they do is do habitat work. Hired by the DNR, they're DNR employees, but their main job, their only goal in life is to go out and do habitat work. So they do burning, they harvest seed, they plant seed, they do wetland restorations, but that's all they do. And the council makes recommendations for that appropriation every 2 years to the tune of about $13 million. So every 2 years, there's $13 million that goes to these crews to do nothing but do work on public lands. Here's a project in St. Louis County. We do creek restorations or river restorations, and here's a before and after. This is a lot of heavy equipment type work, so when we come back to talk about the bill, you'll see the cost for this type of work and per acre is very high, and that's because you're working in a small space with a lot of heavy equipment. Here's another before and after trout stream in southeast Minnesota. Here's what it looks like before, and that's what it looks like after. And then again, we also do or fund projects in the northeast forests of the state. Here's a habitat project working on moose habitat. And what's cool to see is you can get the work done and then a year later, the moose shows up. So it is quite amazing to go out before the work happens and then 2 years later go out there, and it's amazing how the wildlife responds. So if you have any questions, if you are looking for information about what's happening in your district, we have, like I said, our online program management system. Any data you want, anything, we're here to serve. We're nonpartisan staff, so we're here to help. We thank you for your time.
Executive Director. Yes, we'll get some used to that button. Executive Director Johnson and Assistant Director Pavelko, thank you very much for your very important oversight. It is very evident that the Lessard-Sams Outdoor Heritage Fund is doing wonderful, great work in the state of Minnesota. And we are very proud and happy to be a part of that going forward. So we do have some questions for some members, and we'll turn it over to Representative, who has it? Burkle has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, Lessard-Sams has been doing wonderful work, and first off, I just want to, I got a couple of comments and then a question, but I want to thank Mark and Joe and the staff. They are a lean, mean machine there. Do great work with 4 staff and really helped me out starting out. Representative Heinzman didn't tell me how much work Lessard-Sams was when he recruited. Just a few duties, but the summers are busy. But really appreciate them walking me through the process of ranking these projects. And secondly, to the comment from Representative Heinzman about extensions, there was a lot of heartburn about that in committee over the summer. A lot of conversations about that, and things that it was made clear and evident that we need to get the work done to the folks that are bringing these projects. So that was definitely relayed to the folks in the projects. And lastly, I noticed you didn't really talk about, and maybe you weren't prepared to, but if you could just address for a second the invasive carp money that we appropriated last year, right at the very end, had that $12 million. Could you just talk about that for one quick minute, just for the sake of the committee?
Mr. Johnson?
Mr. Chair, members, last year, if you remember, in the legislature, there was a interest to have a invasive carp berry put in on lock and dam number 5. Do something more to try to head off the influx or the inflow of immigration, we should say, I guess, of invasive carp into Minnesota waters or border waters. And the council met in February. We were thankful we had an extra surplus of funds that was divulged with the February forecast. So that money, that $12 million, was recommended for appropriation, and the legislature appropriated it for that. The DNR is the head of a partnership to make that happen. It's the Corps of Engineers, it's Fish and Wildlife Service, and the Geological, Army Corps of Engineers.
USGS.
Yeah, all the feds. I know I'll miss somebody. So at any rate, they are working on the final plans right now and how to implement it. By this, every 6 months they come back to the council. In June, or I believe June or May, they'll be back to the council again with an update on how it's going. So the council is keeping a close eye on it and to again, give them encouragement to keep moving forward as quickly as possible. We know there's some invasive carp already in Minnesota waters because that's been shown, they've been caught and everything. But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't do more, and that's what this is all about. It's doing more. It's trying to put a plug in that thing.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Representative Burkle? Well, the last time I was on Legacy was with Representative Kahn. Many years ago. I don't recall the year, but I think I've learned more today and in the last couple of months meeting with the good folks in the room than I did in 2 years at that time. Nothing against Representative Kahn, but maybe it's I'm older and wiser. Anyway, there definitely is some very important work and good things that are happening in the state, and we're excited to be a part of that. Members, I have a couple questions, but I want to go to you if you have any closing questions. We are scheduled till noon. We will not go till noon, I'm sure. But in the event you have some questions, we do have a couple of minutes to do that. Representative DePel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One more question for Ms. Taylor. What do you believe would be the best pathway and the people to speak with to secure those funds and to move forward with that project?
I'm sorry, Ms. Taylor.
Mr. Chair, they could do a number of different things. Because of the timing and that the Clean Water Council has already made their recommendations for the year, they might want to just come before this body. They also may want to, talk with Paul Gardner. He's the executive director over there of the council and see what he thinks.
Representative DePel.
Thank you, Ms. Taylor. That's all, Mr. Chair. Thanks.
Since it was brought up by Representative DePel, he has an issue in Hastings with some water, and we will address that and do what we can in this committee this year, if we can, to help your drinking water, which is the most important thing that we can put in our bodies.
Fundamental to life.
Amen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, thank you. Question, if there are no other questions, perhaps just we could quickly go through of the 5 categories, what percentage is the administration of these, the programs for outdoor heritage, arts and culture, clean water, and parks and trails? Or is that, if that's something that can't be discussed now, we can certainly get back to the committee later. Representative, or yes, you have the floor. Thank you, Hagemeyer.
Mr. Chair, I don't have an exact number on that. It's going to depend on the fund and on the appropriation, and if it's a direct appropriation to an agency or if it's a competitive grant. And if it's a named grant, they all have a variety of different administrative expenses. As Outdoor Heritage Council just mentioned, like any administrative cost, you have the piece that goes to the DNR to administer the grant, but then they also, the organizations have to approve that their administrative costs are directly related to and necessary for that project. So they all have their own. They're all going to be different. And I wouldn't even necessarily have those. You might be best to ask the grantees or the appropriation receivers to see how much of each appropriation is going to administrative expense.
Thank you, Mr. Hagemeyer. I'm going to leave this thing on. I just won't cough inside of it.
There you go, Chair and members. Mary Davis from House Research. For the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund, it does vary quite a bit, and some of them are specific in the legislation, in the funding legislation, and some of them aren't. But in past years, when we've sort of surveyed groups, we've found as low as 1 or 2% administration to as high as, 7 or 8. But it usually falls into that range of between 3 and 5. But it is a great question to ask either the fiscal agent agency or the grantees.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. I think that we all would agree that if an admin is between 3 and 5%, that's a good use of that money for the taxpayers and make sure the every dollar gets to these great projects. So with no other business before the committee, I just want to thank those interested parties that are in the on the outside of the circle, and thank you for meeting with us. We know that you're doing and representing some great folks and great organizations in our state, and the door is always open, as it has been lately. If I'm not available, the rest of these guys are, and especially Representative Scraba, because he's the vice chair. But we are happy to meet with, continue to meet with folks and your issues throughout the session, and sooner than later. Seeing no other business in this committee, we will be adjourned. Have a great day.